The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida. Welcome to episode 2 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's episode, we'll be giving you some tips and tricks on how to get the most out of Podfest, which is coming up very shortly, a couple days. We chat about the stir Apple has created with its latest email to producers, and the tip of the week on how to properly start an interview.
This episode is brought to you by Flintstone Media. Thanks for joining us. This is Jemmy.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're glad that you're joining us. This show is going to be released on the 1st and the 15th of every month. And there's a monthly newsletter that Jemmy works very hard on that accompanies it. And that comes out once a month, right?
But if there are any errors or mistakes, it's your fault.
It's my fault. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that one comes out on the 15th. So every episode that's released on the 15th will be accompanied by this newsletter. And you can find all the shows, the newsletters, all that stuff at FloridaPodcastingNews.com. So anything that you hear here, even if it's an older episode, you can go back and see the show notes and get all the links and information.
All right, well, let's get right into it with the Florida-specific news. Well, next week and a couple days coming up, depending on when you're listening to this, is going to be Podfest. And Podfest is the second largest conference for podcasters in the world. I've been attending that for 6 years now, I believe, since it was a little...
banned you yet.
I know.
Amazing.
I know. You know, I was honored because the organizer of that's Chris Kermitzos, and his wife, Katie, last week on a Facebook Live said that I am the mayor of Podfest. She declared me the mayor. So.
Oh, no. All right. We got to stop this. I need to put an end to this madness. Just the other day, you're called one of the most successful podcasters on planet Earth, and now you're the mayor of Podfest.
I'm going to wear a sash.
You used to be the king in your improv company. This is a mess.
People will start bowing to me yet again.
You still have a crown. You know you want them to. Anyway,
at Podfest, one of my roles was actually to greet everybody. That was my job. Chris
Walmart.
said, "Yeah, exactly." I was the Walmart greeter. I would stand by the table where they check everybody in. And I was supposed to say hi to everybody.
All right, well, Walmart greeter, why don't you tell us how they can make the best of their Podfest trip?
If you're coming into Podfest, there's a couple things that you need to know. First, the schedules are now out for Friday and Saturday for the sessions and the tracks.
If you go to FloridaPodcastNetwork.com/PME19, you'll find them right there.
Or you can go to the Podfest community page on Facebook, and they have them listed there. They're under the files section, which, by the way, I didn't even know that there was a files section on Facebook, but apparently on the left there is. So there is a file section, and you'll find them right there. You can print them out and bring them with you, and I'm sure they'll be up on the website, and apparently there's going to be an app that we can all use when we're there as well. So to kind of go through some of the things you don't want to miss in order, if you're getting in on Wednesday, and this hasn't been highly publicized, but it's going on, it's going to happen, is Jonathan from Trivial Warfare, which is the most popular trivia podcast in the world.
So well done.
It is. I played it once with Diane Daniels of Florida also, and we won.
I was going to say, I was hoping you played against each other. I was going to say Diane must have beat you. Darn it.
And because I don't know how we won. It was just, we were terrible. But anyway, they're doing a trivia night. They're going to do that on Wednesday night. So if you're getting in early and you want to have something to do on Wednesday night, that'll happen in the area around the ballrooms where we're doing Podfest. So you can sit in with Jonathan. We're going to try, Jemmy and I are going to try and make it so you can say hi to us if you see us there. Now, Thursday is when all of the sessions, they're having long sessions on different things. Some of them you have to pay for. And one of the things you can do on Thursday that's free, that from what I understand, if you have the VIP ticket, the highest ticket, you can get into any of the sessions on Thursday. If you don't, then you have to pay for them and sign up for them. But the Picha Kucha, which I have no idea what that is. What is that? You did one at Podcast Movement, right?
I did, and it was fun. So it's basically like a 5-minute presentation, and the challenge of the Picha Kucha is that the slides automatically transition. So it really helps work the muscles of just having to kind of go by the seat of your pants, keep things tight, and really know what you're talking about. And so that each presenter, they can talk about literally anything they want, but they're given 5 minutes. And the slides are timed out. And so what's really great as an observer is to go and just see how the different people work those rules for their advantage and for their presentation. It's actually really, really cool. And it was a lot of fun to participate in. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Keep your eye out for these events a couple months early, because you want to look for opportunities for you guys to do these kind of things too. Me being on the stage for the Pechakucha at Podcast Movement was really cool, because the whole rest of the time, I mean, people kept coming up to me. It's a great thing that it happens in the very beginning of conferences, because the whole rest of the time you're there, people come up and want, they already know who you are. It was really awesome. So be a participant if you can next year, but be an observer this year. It's really something special.
God, I would suck at that. I can't say hi in 5 minutes.
You really can't.
No. So that's on Thursday. It took me
longer to explain what it is.
You took you longer than 5 minutes to explain it. All right, that's on Thursday afternoon, and that's free. You can go see that. But what you don't want to miss, absolutely don't want to miss Thursday night, is the Strategic Alliance. Mm-hmm. This is something that I don't know any other conference that does it. Chris does this so well. He has it. It's like a scientific mathematical formula to get it to work. So bring about 100 business cards. Literally, you think I'm kidding? No. Bring about 100 business cards. You're going to give that many away. And it's a way to meet a lot of people in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And he does it so well, and it's also fun. But you're also going to want to go to this. This is Thursday night from 6 to 9. You're going to want to be there because Jemmy and I kick off that Strategic Alliance with our welcome.
They're trusting us with the main stage, those fools.
We're leading the way. I've been doing this, since Podfest started, I've been doing the kickoff. And now Jemmy's joining me this year, so the pressure's off me and on her.
Everything's kind of come full circle. Yeah, my first time at Podfest. I remember peeking my head and seeing you up on that stage with your cowboy hat, commanding the whole room. And now I get to one-up you.
That's right. You get to do all the work. I'll just watch.
I'm going to try. And I also want to mention that I organize a Palm Beach Podcasters Meetup group, and we haven't done anything for quite some time, but we have it scheduled for 5:15 to kick it back off on Thursday, right before the Strategic Alliance. So if you get there even a little earlier than 6 o'clock, we're going to be out there milling about in that same area. We're going to meet there, Palm Beach Podcasters Meetup group. It's awesome. One of the key things about conferences is the networking opportunities, and that's what the Strategic Alliance is all about, but that's also what random meetups and breakouts and things like that can be about. So palmbeachpodcasters.com for more information.
And that's for people who live in Southeast Florida?
Southeast Florida, but I mean, if anyone wants to come just meet us there, then just come meet us and say
hello. And where is it going to be?
It's going to be in that, central area. You won't miss us. We'll put out more announcements.
Okay, Jemmy will be the only. We'll make this very specific. Jemmy will be the only 5'2" African American podcaster in the place.
Down to almost my butt. You cannot miss me.
You cannot miss her. Or you can just listen to her. You can hear her from across the room.
Yeah. You'll get it. You'll find me.
She'll be there.
You'll find me.
And usually the guy with the cowboy hat is nearby. So yeah. Can find him too. So that's on Thursday. So a lot going on Thursday. You're going to definitely want to check that all out. As Jemmy said, don't forget to talk to everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody is friendly at this conference. It is the friendliest conference you're ever going to go to. It's like a family. You just walk up and say hi. I certainly do. I probably meet everybody before the weekend's done. So. Right. You definitely want to say hi and talk to everybody. Also, attend the park.
Don't be afraid to. If you think someone's not your normal person, you would come and say hi to. Say hi anyway. This is not that kind of situation. Everybody is friends with everybody. And what's awesome is, you take a look at Glenn and I on paper. Why are we friends? Exactly. But it works, and he's one of my besties now. And clearly, we're making a name for ourselves as partners in podcasting, and that kind of magic happens because people aren't afraid to go say hello. So don't you be afraid to go say hello either.
Go to the parties too. There's some good parties. Friday night there's going to be a party by the title sponsor that's going to be a blowout bash. So there's a lot going on that way. Go to the parties. That's where you really do meet people. There are a number of good restaurants. Also, this is one of the problems we had with the Podfest in the early years when it was in Tampa. There were no good places to eat.
No. You said there was a strip club right next door. Right. I heard they serve excellent steak.
But there are a number of good restaurants right off the parking lot. So the hotel has restaurants. The parking lot, if you walk the back parking lot in the back, has some restaurants. So there's also a Wawa. So if you want to eat cheap, Wawa has good food, actually. They have good sandwiches and stuff. So there's all kinds of restaurants right there.
On that Wawa tip.
Yeah, you're not going to have a problem there. But definitely say hi to everybody, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. Jemmy and I are doing a couple of panels and breakouts. You'll see our names on the list there as well. Very good. Let's head now to the podcasting news. Well, Apple kind of created a stir in the podcasting world yesterday, and I did not get one of these letters. Did you get one of the infamous Apple letters?
I didn't, and I feel really left out and unloved.
I know. I have like 100 podcasts, and I didn't get any letters. So anyway, apparently they sent out letters that they're threatening to take people's podcasts down if they don't abide by the rules. And the rules include this. The big one is that everybody's talking about is no episode numbers in the title.
I mean, thank you, Apple, 10 years later. I mean, where are we supposed to go to clean up all that? Everybody does that.
I mean, Jemmy and I, we have 8,000 episodes, literally 8,000 episodes that have numbers in the title.
I mean, my God, why not? This is one that I don't understand. I don't understand this rule.
Well, they're saying it's because now they have a spot for season and episode numbers. But the problem with that is, and this is the problem I have, is if you're using the Apple Podcast app, you do see, they do show you their episode number slot. Mm-hmm. But Pocket Cast, for example, which is one of the biggest ones out there as a podcast player, it pulls off of Apple. Right. But when I look at the show notes or when I look at the episode, it does not show the episode number.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, as a listener, I want to know what episode number I'm on, because sometimes it's important, even if it's not, a series as Apple wants you to find, like they say, is it a series? Is it important if it's episodic? Does it matter what order you listen to? Even if specifically it doesn't, like technically it doesn't really matter what order you listen to this, but it's so easy to just be like, oh yeah, I've listened to the first episode already. Or I know I've listened to episode 3 or for someone else to say, oh, that was on episode 57 instead of that was on episode titled blah, 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 blah. Like it's just so much easier to have episode numbers right there. And you're right. Just because, I'm sorry, but Apple, we love you. You're the big kahuna and everything, but not everyone who aggregates from your feeds, goes by the same format. And that's going to be a real loss, not be able to put episode numbers in there.
It's going to be a problem. And, we, at the Horse Radio Network, only less than 40% of our listens now come from Apple. It's from, so that means the majority is from somewhere else.
Right.
And so now is Google going to pick up episode numbers? No, they don't really have a place to do that. So it's going to be a mess. And we're going to have to go,
move, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're going to have to go back and take, and they're saying they're going to pull people. So, we literally will have to go back probably to 2,000 episodes and take numbers out.
I just don't understand. This is one, I could swallow it easier if I could understand it. I don't understand it.
A couple other things is they don't want you doing a verbatim repetition of the title or author name in a description. For example, if your title is The Very Hungry Tourist by Dr. Maria Sanchez, they don't want you saying those exact words in the description. So you can't put those exact words down in the description, which we've been guilty of at times. So down below, you can put that now we're talking to Dr. Maria. Just put them in a different order.
Make a sentence out of it instead of just a headline.
They just don't want duplication is what they're really trying to avoid here.
This one I do understand it. And actually, I think if you do this just as a general SEO practice, you're kind of, regardless of this rule from Apple, you're doing yourself a disservice because, you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to put, extra substance, extra stuff into the content, into the metadata, like your description, beyond what you've already put in there. It doesn't make any sense to me. So this one I do get.
My friend Steve Stewart, who edits podcasts, did have a suggestion for the episode numbers. He said, put them at the beginning of your descriptions so that you can still find an episode number at the beginning of the description. And it's what we're going to have to do because we use them internally too. That's the other thing.
That's so frustrating still, because even when I'm looking on the Apple podcast player, I know you don't have an iPhone, but I do. When I look at that player, the descriptions aren't visible unless you click through details. So I'm just really annoyed.
I know. But it is creating a stir because everybody's done it this way for years. We've all done it this way.
Sense.
And we use them internally. Now, the other thing we do internally that a lot of people don't think about unless you have a network is we have a network feed. So we have a Horse Radio network feed. We have a Florida Podcast network feed that sends out every episode of every show we put. And our super fans will listen off that feed, so they don't have to subscribe separately to all the shows. Right. Well, we have to put the name of our show at the beginning of the title. Right. So they know which show we're listening.
Exactly. For example, we had a new episode come out today for another show on the network called People of Palm Beach. So in the FPN feed, it says People of Palm Beach, and then it's the title of the show, which includes the episode number.
And I'm wondering if Apple's going to look at that and say that's duplicating the title of the show. And it is in the title, but we have to do it because of...
Except I don't think it will, because I think the title of the show technically in that case is Horse Radio Network, not Horses in the Morning or anything.
Yeah, that's
true. So I think with the titles, I think we're probably okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this just came out yesterday. There's going to be a lot more said on this as clarifications. And some of our
climbing onto those soapboxes, man.
Well, this will be talk next week at Podfest for sure.
Yeah, it will.
Hey, Chartable is another place that's starting to come into the forefront. They're pulling data from Apple and other places to start putting some numbers together. And this I found interesting. They found that about a quarter of U.S. adults, 23 to 25%, tune into podcasts a few times a week or even daily. And that means if you take a look at the United States, that's about 91 million people listening at least once a week. So almost 100 million people listening once a week. Wow. Less than 22%, they said they never listen to podcasts. Well, they don't talk to people I talk to, because I still find people that never listen to podcasts or don't know what they are.
What's a podcast?
Yeah, exactly. And then also they found the number of podcasts available increased last year in 2018. Get this, 575 new podcasts were started every day in 2018. 575.
Every day?
Of more than the 670,000 shows. Wow. Chartable tracks on Apple Podcast Directory, more than 210,000 were started last year.
We might be encouraging people too much.
Well, what I would like to know is, of the 210,000, how many are still active?
Still going, yeah. Exactly.
That would be interesting.
Exactly. How many faded after like 6 episodes or something, right?
Another interesting thing we did over at the Horse Radio Network is I did a poll of our auditors, which is our Patreon subscribers, our super fans, and got a couple hundred responses. And it was, what I asked them is, how did you first hear about the first show you listened to on the Horse Radio Network? How did you come to find us? And the results were not what I expected. I haven't gone over these with Jemmy yet, so I'll see. I want to get your opinion. They were not what I expected. This is how it came down. A podcast search on a podcast player. They searched horse in iTunes, right? 56%, a majority, found our shows through a search in a podcast player. Only 14% were friends.
Wait. I want to back up to that 56%. Yeah. What I find really interesting about that is, so I'm thinking about, you're well known for the Horse Radio Network being the niche of a niche of a niche, right? It's a niche network. Right. All about horses. What that's telling me is that podcasts as a concept is infiltrating everything. So now, no matter what people's hobby is, even something as niche as a horse people, they're still taking that key term and plugging it into their podcast player and searching for content. That to me is awesome.
That means also to me that they didn't come to podcasting for a horse podcast. They came to podcasting for something else. We're already on the player, and then said, oh, I wonder if there's any horse podcasts. So true, yeah. Serial brought them in, NPR, something else brought them into the podcast player.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So it wasn't us directly.
You're right. I
found,
get that, yeah.
Yeah, I found interesting. So friends were only 14%. I thought word of mouth would have been higher than that, especially in our world, as niche as it is. That's Google search, I thought that was going to be the highest, and it was only 12%.
Well, I think part of that is because I think, again, it's like what I was just saying. People are now getting used to, instead of going to Google to search for podcast content, now they're going straight to their player because more people are adapting the use of podcast players on there. It's all good thing. I think
we would really not have seen that 5 years ago.
No, not in a million years. No way.
No. You know what? I was also surprised that Facebook posts, and we do a lot of them. Okay. And we do paid posts too, was 5% of the total found us through Facebook. From a guest, 5%. So everybody, that's one of the things they teach you is you got to make sure your guests are promoting your shows. Well, it got us 5%. So, and we know the guests promote our shows, but where are they promoting it? usually on Facebook or Twitter. What kind of results have we had from Facebook or Twitter? 5%. So, yes, I'm glad to have the 10% total from a guest and from Facebook posts, but it's not a majority like everybody thinks that's where your listeners come from.
That's true.
Found the Horse Radio Network app. I thought that would have been much higher. We've had over 20-some thousand people download our app, yet only 2% found our shows by searching in the App Store horse to see what kind of apps there were.
You know what? I just had another thought on the whole podcast search on a player thing being 56% and so huge. That actually speaks to what Apple's doing. Not to defend Apple. I just got off my soapbox upset at them, but they're talking about they're really trying to emphasize making sure your metadata is strong and well filled out and all that. And that's what allows people to discover you through search. So well done. Apparently you're doing it right.
Well, I think the other thing we did right on that point, you're absolutely right, is we name the shows exactly what they are. Mm-hmm. So we don't use obscure names that mean nothing to anybody. We Horses in the Morning.
Right.
We're a daily show talking about horses in the morning.
Right. Retired racehorse. What is it?
Retired Racehorse Radio. It's about retired racehorses. We do the dressage radio show. Mm-hmm. Anybody interested in dressage, it's going to go look for that. If we had called it something else, they would have never found it.
Right.
So Horsemanship Radio is a show about horsemanship, and people will search for horsemanship. So I think that's the other thing we did right. So the others that were on the list that really got minimal was media partners, sponsors. Only 1% came through our sponsors, and Twitter was less than 1%, actually. So I was very surprised. I hope you found that interesting. But that just means, keep in mind, your metadata, your descriptions, your titles of your episodes, your descriptions in your episodes all matter, because that's what's searching on the players.
There you go. Well, wouldn't you know that right after Glenn and I finished recording, editing, and publishing this episode, I got a very interesting email from Rob Walsh over at Liberated Syndication, aka Libsyn, and it puts a bunch of our fears at ease. I'm a Libsyn affiliate, so it's really great to get these inside scoops. So I just had to record this quick note and throw it in here and share it with you. So, okay, here's the bottom line. And this only applies to hosting services like Libsyn that allow you to specify your iTunes tags in your metadata. Basically, you want to put your episode title in your iTunes tag without the episode number. This is what matters to Apple. Your main episode title can still have the episode number in it. However, the caveat is that you have to actually use that iTunes tag for this to apply. If you leave that field empty, the iTunes tag field, Apple will default back to the main episode title tag, and you could get dinged for having the episode number in there. So, if you're able to specify the iTunes tag, do it. And don't include the episode number. Your main title tag can still have it, but if you can't specify your iTunes tag, leave the episode number out of the main title tag to keep Apple happy. Capiche? Okay, take a deep breath. For more information, Libsyn is conducting a live webinar tonight. There is a link in the show notes of this episode to register. All right, well, here's where we tell you what's the latest that's going on with the Florida Podcast Network. So we just want to briefly introduce you to the news that the latest show, People of Palm Beach, had its pilot launch yesterday. So as we're actually recording this is today, but released yesterday if you're listening to this on time. And that show is actually hosted by Suzanne Boyd, who is a veteran news reporter, and she's just so great. And she actually, the whole concept of the show is to introduce people to local personalities, interesting stories. So I want to talk a little bit about the pilot, because the pilot, as I was sitting there, actually was in the room as it was being recorded. It was a luncheon from a local college, Palm Beach State College Foundation, hosted this luncheon, and Suzanne Boyd got to introduce their featured guest. It was James Patterson, notable Florida author who lives in Palm Beach. And what was really great about that was
notable Florida author, one of the most successful authors in the world ever.
I know. All right. So I didn't.
It's only sold 100 bazillion books.
Didn't mean to do it. But what was great about that? So the whole discussion was about literacy. So as I'm sitting there in that room, and the whole crowd, probably about 200 people at least, all getting jazzed and pumped up and inspired to help promote literacy in our local community. And I'm like, if that was it then after that conversation, yeah, some people have been inspired and gone on their way. But with it being a podcast that's released now on the Florida Podcast Network, that conversation gets to inspire so many more people. And it's going to have even bigger impact on the local community. And it just makes me so jazzed that, we're building something here that is going to have that kind of effect on Florida and in all kinds of ways that we can't even foresee yet. So I'm excited. People of Palm Beach just dropped. Go to floridapodcastnetwork.com for more information, or peopleofpalmbeachpodcast.com. And if you're listening to this podcast anywhere else, I also want to encourage everyone to take a moment to subscribe to that aggregate feed that Glenn was mentioning a minute ago. There's an FPN feed. You can look it up in iTunes, and it's a feed of all of our shows, so you won't miss out on any future releases. And we also have bonus content that shows up only on that feed, so make sure you subscribe.
That's Florida Podcast Network. Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses, serving as a highly resourceful website and podcast production house since 2010. Ready to be seen? Flintstone Media has crafted the online presence for dozens of brands. In creating an intelligently built website that acts as your business's beacon, Flintstone Media will craft solid and attractive content to control your brand's message, collect visitor data, and showcase what you have to offer. Ready to be heard? Work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jemmy will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for website and podcast samples and to ignite your digital presence. That's flintstonemedia.com. Well, now it's time for our tip section, which we've been podcasting for so long we can't even come up with a name for it, I guess. It's our tip section.
If we ever take our own advice, we would literally just call it the final tip section. But we're actually going to go against our word, and we want something a little bit better than that. So if you have an idea, please email us, Jemmy or Glenn, at floridapodcastnetwork.com. What should we call this segment already? Gosh. So what do you have for us this time, Glenn?
Well, this time, between Jemmy and I, literally, we've interviewed over 5,000 guests. Mm-hmm. And that we're not exaggerating.
No, and we've actually interviewed each other quite a few times.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that really bother me when I hear interviews on podcasts. And one of them, and there's a lot of things that bother me when I hear interviews on podcasts, because it's just a good way to interview for the listener's benefit and then not a good way. And I haven't always done this right. We make these mistakes all the time, and we're trying not to more and more, because we interview a lot of people, especially on our morning show, Horses in the Morning. I interview a lot of people. We'll have maybe 4 guests in an episode. So right. People are hearing boom, 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 boom. So what I want to deal with today is the beginning of the interview, the very beginning, where you're bringing the guest on and rolling.
Right. You literally just said action.
Action. We can't do the rest. We can't do this all in one section. So we'll break this up. So we're at the very beginning. 2 real big things that will improve your interviews is don't ask, how are you? Now, we do this sometimes in the live show if we're not even sure the guest is there, because we're doing it live and we have a producer that sets up the guests and we're bringing them on. But if you're doing a recorded show like 99.9% of you are, I assume as a listener, you've already talked to the guest before you start recording. You've already gone through how are you.
And I really don't. They're going to give any other answer other than
they're going to say, "Oh, I'm crappy today," and I really had.
Sciatica's really acting up.
Right, I had this boil, and it's that's not happening. So, and then they ask how you are. That's the natural response, and now you have to try and say, "I'm fine." And it really gets old if you have multiple guests.
No one cares.
Yeah. If you have multiple guests, it gets old. So do not ask that question. And then also immediately, I'm going to give you an example of right and wrong here, but don't ask, tell us a little bit about yourself, because that opens you up to 10 minutes of I was born and I wasn't born in the hospital. I was born in the car on the way, and it was a mess, and my dad had to do, it just opens you up to what potentially could be 25 minutes of story.
Right.
It's your job to introduce them. It's your job to set the stage in one paragraph, by the way, not a whole book, but in one paragraph to set the stage for why they're there and get right into it.
Right. So honestly, to speak to your first point real quick, when you get a guest on, especially for those pre-recorded podcasters like we're talking to mostly, ask them how they are before you record. Have a chit chat session, get that all out of the way. And actually it builds some comfort level anyway. And it makes the start of the interview that much stronger because it builds up your chemistry. So get that, ask how are you, just not when you're recording beforehand.
That's right. And don't tell us a little bit about yourself. That's your job to find out about them before you start.
That's an Achilles heel of an interview. Ugh.
Yeah. That tells me as a podcast host and listener that you've done no research on this person. You have nothing about it.
It tells the person too, and it's an awful way to set up an interviewee because they feel completely unwelcome and they feel like you don't care.
So I'm going to give you an example. Jemmy's going to be the guest, and I'm going to give you an example of how I would do it correctly. So this might help you with an example. So we'll do a little role playing.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to hear you introduce me.
So here we go.
Whatever he says is not true.
3, 2, 1. Coming up next on the show is Florida podcast legend, Jemmy Lagonier.
You stumbled on my name.
I did. She has produced and hosted many successful Florida-themed shows, including her most current one, the widely popular Finding Florida, a travel adventure show like nothing I've heard before. Jemmy, you've traveled all over the state. What has been your favorite Florida stop from the show?
I love that. It's a very specific question at the end of your close of the intro. Perfect, spot on, well done, and kudos for calling me a legend. I do appreciate it.
But most people would ask, and 99% of the interviews I hear would say this, Jemmy, why did you start this show?
Oh, gosh, yes. Or how much fun is it doing this show?
You can get to that later. You can get to that in the conversation, but start out with something that somebody, like when I ask her, what has been your favorite Florida stop from the show? That's something really fun, and she's going to come back with a fun answer. It's also going to get some
meat.
You're going to get your guest doing something that they really know and they really enjoy and they really like to answer. And it just gets a conversation rolling without the standard, how did you start?
Right.
And you'll get to how do you start down later in the interview. That'll come. But let's start with something that draws the listener in immediately, like, oh, yeah, I live in Florida. Where was your favorite? So just think about those things when you start the interview. I don't do this right every time. And usually when I don't do it right is when I haven't properly prepped for the guest.
I was just going to say, absolutely. Yeah. And it comes across as fairly obvious.
Yes, it does. So that's just the beginning of the interview. There's a lot more techniques in the interview, but this is something that you can apply today. Think about that beginning. And also I've heard podcasters do 25 paragraph introduction. I realize that your guest has a lot of credit, and you do have to give them some credibility when you start the interview, but you can do that in 3 sentences. Mm-hmm. And that's enough. I'll learn the rest in the interview.
And remember that put a link in your show notes. Say, for more information, you can find more information in the show notes. We don't need the entire Bible on your guest in the intro. You can get some more information later.
You need enough to get your listener going, I want to hear this guest.
Right.
But you're going to learn the rest along the way.
Right.
So that's my tip for this episode.
For more updates on all of this and other news, plus details and show notes about today's show, speaking of show notes and links and whatnot, go to FloridaPodcastingNews.com. You can find details and show notes about today's episode. Plus, sign up and receive the newsletter that accompanies this podcast on the 15th of every month. We also would really, really love your feedback. This is a new show, and the whole purpose of doing the show is to give you guys good, valuable content and information on podcasting and opportunities here in Florida. So please join us in our closed Facebook group exclusively for our super fans of Florida Podcast Network shows. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments and to gain access to early scoops, contests, other special treats. Just tell us what you need, what you want to hear. We'd love to hear all of it. So we look forward to meeting you in there. And if you have podcasting news to submit to the show or to our newsletter, please email me at Jaime, Jaime, at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com.
We have a whole bunch of shows on the Florida Podcast Network. If you want to be one of those, get a hold of us. We're taking a look at adding new shows all the time, and you can find all the ones we currently have at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com. Until next time, we'll see you at Podfest #1 next week. And thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.